I stood on a stranger's porch holding a leash, a bag of dog food, and a box of memories I didn't ask to be carrying. And the woman who opened that door was not the woman I drove 3 hours to see. My name is Marcus Fielding. I'm 32, and up until that Saturday morning, I thought the hardest part of my year was already behind me. I was wrong. The hardest part was standing right in front of me in a paint-splattered t-shirt, looking just as confused as I felt, asking why a total stranger was holding a golden retriever on her porch step at 9 in the morning. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the dog. His name was Otis. Golden retriever, 4 years old, ears too big for his head, even as an adult. The kind of dog who greeted burglars and best friends with the exact same amount of enthusiasm. Megan Sinclair and I got him together during the best year of our relationship, back when we still finished each other's sentences instead of finishing each other's patience. We'd been together almost 3 years. 2 of those years were good. The last one was a slow leak, the kind you don't notice until you're standing in an empty apartment wondering where all the air went. She left in March. Not dramatically, not with slammed doors or thrown plates. Just a quiet conversation on a Tuesday night, where she said the words "I don't think I'm happy," and I realized I'd been waiting for her to say them for months without admitting it to myself. She'd taken a new job 3 hours north, in a small town called Bellamy Creek, an administrative role at a hospital system that paid better than anything she'd had here. She moved in April. Otis stayed with me because her new apartment didn't allow pets over 30 pounds, and Otis was built like a small horse who thought he was a lap dog. For 4 months, Otis was mine. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself a lot of things were temporary that summer. Then in July, Megan called and said she'd found a house to rent, a real house with a yard, and the landlord was fine with dogs. She wanted Otis back. I understood. He was her dog first. Technically, since she was the one who'd fallen for him at the shelter while I was still debating whether we were ready for the responsibility. I'd grown attached to him in ways I wasn't prepared for, but I wasn't going to be the guy who held a woman's dog hostage out of spite. So we agreed. I'd drive him up on a Saturday, drop him off, and that would be the last piece of my old life officially closed out. I want to be honest about something. Some small, stupid part of me was hoping the drive would turn into a conversation. Not a reconciliation, nothing that dramatic, just closure. A real goodbye instead of the half-finished one we'd had in April. I told myself I wasn't hoping for that. I was lying to myself the whole 3 hours up. The drive itself was uneventful in the way only long highway drives can be. 3 hours of gas station coffee, classic rock, and Otis sticking his head between the front seats every 20 minutes like he was checking whether we'd arrived yet. I'd printed out the address because my phone's GPS had a habit of losing signal in the hills outside Bellamy Creek. 214 Larkspur Lane. A small blue house with white trim, according to the photos Megan had texted me months ago when she first signed the lease. I remembered the photos because I'd looked at them longer than I should have, trying to imagine her life in a place I'd never seen. I pulled up outside 214 Larkspur Lane a little after 9 in the morning. Small blue house, white trim, exactly like the photos. Good. I hadn't written down the wrong address, at least. Otis was already whining with excitement, front paws up on the door, tail going like a metronome set to a song only he could hear. He recognized the neighborhood. Or maybe he just recognized excitement in my own posture and matched it. Dogs do that. They mirror you whether you want them to or not. I got him leashed, grabbed the bag of his food and the little box of toys and vet records Megan had asked me to bring, and walked up the short concrete path to the front door. I knocked. Otis sat, tail thumping against the porch boards, ears up, waiting for the door to open on the person he loved most in the world. It opened. And it wasn't Megan. The woman standing there was maybe 30, dark hair pulled back in a loose knot with pieces falling out around her face, a gray t-shirt with a streak of blue paint across one shoulder, bare feet, and an expression that went from polite confusion to genuine alarm the second she saw the very large dog sitting expectantly on her porch. She said, "Can I help you?" I looked past her into the house. half expecting Megan to appear behind her, some roommate situation I hadn't been told about. But the front hallway behind this woman looked nothing like anything Megan would have decorated. There were moving boxes stacked against one wall, half unpacked, a ladder leaning near the staircase, and paint swatches taped to the wall in a fan of blues and greens. "I'm looking for Megan Sinclair," I said. "This is 214 Larkspur, right?" The woman blinked. "It is. But there's no Megan here. I just moved in 3 weeks ago." Otis, sensing something was wrong in the way dogs always do, let out a soft, confused whine and looked up at me like I'd made a mistake he was too polite to point out directly. I looked down at the printed address in my hand, then back up at the house number screwed into the siding beside the door. 214, Larkspur Lane. Everything matched. "I'm sorry, this doesn't make sense. She signed a lease here back in April." The woman's expression softened slightly, the alarm draining into something more like sympathy, which somehow felt worse. "I bought this place from the landlord in June. He told me the previous tenant broke the lease early and moved out sometime in May. I don't know where she went." I stood there on the porch of a house that used to belong, however briefly, to the woman I'd loved for 3 years, holding her dog in a bag of his food, realizing I had absolutely no idea where she currently lived. "I'm really sorry," the woman said, and she sounded like she meant it, which was somehow more disarming than if she'd just been annoyed by the interruption. "That's a rough way to find out someone moved." "You have no idea," I said, and something in my voice must have carried more weight than I intended, because she winced a little in sympathy. "Do you want to come in for a second? I have coffee. You look like you drove a while." I should have said no. I should have thanked her, apologized for the confusion, and gone back to my car to figure out what to do next from the privacy of my own steering wheel. Instead, I said, 3 hours, like that explained something, and she smiled and stepped back to let me and Otis inside. Her name was Clare Whitfield. She was a muralist, which explained the paint on her shoulder and the ladder propped near the staircase, and she'd moved to Bellamy Creek from 2 towns over after finally saving enough to buy her first house outright. No landlord, no lease, nothing she didn't own herself. She told me this while she poured 2 mugs of coffee in a kitchen that still smelled faintly of fresh paint, moving around the half-unpacked boxes like she'd lived there for years instead of weeks. Otis, for his part, had already made himself comfortable on a folded moving blanket by the back door, apparently deciding that any house with sunlight coming through the window was an acceptable house to nap in. Claire watched him for a second and laughed under her breath. "He's very confident for a dog who has no idea where he is," she said. "That's kind of his whole personality," I said. "Confidence without context." She handed me a mug. "Sounds like a lot of men I've dated." I laughed before I could stop myself, and something about the sound of it in that unfamiliar kitchen made the whole strange morning feel slightly less disorienting. I sat down at a small round table that still had a price sticker on the underside of one leg, and Claire sat across from me, tucking one bare foot up under her. "So," she said, "can I ask what the story is here? You don't have to tell me. But you look like a man who just drove 3 hours to deliver a dog to a woman who apparently doesn't live here anymore, and I'm nosy enough to want the details." I told her, not everything, not the parts that still felt too raw to say out loud to a stranger, but enough. "Megan and I dated 3 years. We broke up in the spring. She moved north for work. The dog was supposed to go with her once she found a place that allowed him. I'd been the one keeping him in the meantime, and somewhere in those 4 months I'd stopped thinking of it as temporary custody and started thinking of Otis as simply mine, which made this whole drive more complicated than I'd let myself admit before I got in the car. Claire listened without interrupting, which I appreciated more than I expected to. When I finished, she was quiet for a second, turning her mug slowly on the table. "Can I be honest?" she said. "You don't seem like a guy who's devastated about losing the woman. You seem like a guy who's devastated about losing the dog." I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it again, because she wasn't wrong, and there was something unsettling about being read so accurately by someone I'd known for 11 minutes. "That obvious?" I asked. "A little," she said, not unkindly. You keep looking over at him like you're worried he's going to disappear too. I looked over at Otis, who chose that exact moment to roll onto his back with all four legs in the air, completely unbothered by the emotional weight of the conversation happening 6 feet away from him. Claire laughed again, and this time I laughed with her, and for a moment the tightness in my chest that had been building since the front door opened on a stranger loosened just slightly. I don't actually know what to do now, I admitted. I don't have her number anymore. We agreed I'd delete it after this, for both our sakes. I don't have her new address. I don't even know if she's still working at the same hospital. Claire tilted her head. You could try the hospital. If she took an admin job there, someone might be able to point you in the right direction, or at least pass along a message. That feels like a lot of effort for a dog handoff that was supposed to take 15 minutes. Is it just a dog handoff, though? Claire asked, and there was nothing accusatory in her voice, just genuine curiosity, the kind that comes from someone who's spent enough time being honest with herself to recognize when someone else isn't being honest with himself yet. I didn't answer right away, and she let the silence sit there instead of rushing to fill it, which was its own kind of kindness. I don't know, I finally said. I told myself this was about doing right by her, giving her the dog because he's hers, because it's the decent thing, because I didn't want to be the guy who makes a breakup uglier than it has to be. But sitting here right now, I think I might have been hoping the drive would turn into something else. One more conversation. A real goodbye instead of the half one we had. Claire nodded slowly, like this confirmed something she'd already suspected. And instead you got me, which is probably a worse trade. I don't know about worse, I said, and meant it more than I expected to when the words came out. She smiled at that, quick and a little surprised, like she hadn't expected me to say it either. Then she stood up and grabbed her phone off the counter. Let me look something up. What hospital system was it? Bellamy Creek General, I think. Or maybe it was the regional one, Crestwood Health. I honestly don't remember. She mentioned it once, and I wasn't paying close enough attention because I was still trying not to cry in a parking lot. Claire winced sympathetically. Fair enough. She tapped at her phone for a minute, scrolling, then set it down. There's only one hospital system in this town, so it's probably Crestwood. That's about 10 minutes from here. If she still works there, someone in HR might at least be willing to pass along a message, even if they won't give out her address directly. Hospitals are usually careful about that stuff. So my options are drive to a hospital and hope a stranger takes pity on me, or drive 3 hours home with a dog I'm not supposed to have anymore. When you put it like that, it does sound bleak, Claire said, grinning. But look at it this way. You already survived the worst version of this morning. Showing up at the wrong door and getting stuck in a stranger's kitchen. Everything from here is basically improvement. I laughed again, surprising myself with how easy it was becoming around her. You have a strange way of being comforting. I get that a lot, she said. We sat there a little longer, finishing the coffee, Otis snoring softly by the back door in a patch of sun, and for the first time since I'd knocked on that door, I let myself actually look around the kitchen instead of just standing in it. There was a half-finished mural sketch taped above the stove, some kind of wildflower field in blues and yellows, pencil lines waiting for paint. A stack of records leaned against the wall near a record player still in its box. The whole place had the unfinished, hopeful energy of somebody building a life from scratch, on purpose, without asking anyone's permission first. Can I ask you something? I said. Depends on the something. Why'd you buy a house alone? Not trying to be weird about it. Most people your age are still renting or buying with a partner. You did this by yourself. Claire considered the question like she'd been asked it before and had a real answer ready, not a deflection. Because I spent 4 years waiting for someone else to be ready to build a life with me, and I got tired of putting my own life on hold for a decision that wasn't mine to make. So I stopped waiting. Saved for 2 years, found this place, bought it with my own name on the deed. No one's permission required. That's either the healthiest thing I've heard all year or the saddest, I said. Why not both? She said, and there was something in the way she said it, dry and a little sharp, that told me she'd earned that answer the hard way. I finished my coffee and stood up, because staying any longer started to feel like something other than a stranger being kind to a man having a bad morning, and I wasn't sure I trusted myself to name what that something else might be. Claire walked me to the door, Otis trailing behind with his leash dragging. Clearly disappointed the nap had ended early. "Thank you," I said. Genuinely. This could have been a much worse morning. "It still might be," she said. "You've got a hospital to interrogate and possibly a very awkward reunion ahead of you. Don't remind me." She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed loosely. "For what it's worth, whatever happens with the ex, I think you should keep the dog." "That's not really my call to make." "Maybe not," she said. "But for someone who drove 3 hours to give him back, you sure don't look happy about it." I didn't have a good answer for that, so I didn't try to give one. I just thanked her again, loaded Otis into the truck, and pulled away from 214 Larkspur Lane with more questions than I'd arrived with. Crestwood Regional Health sat on the edge of town, a sprawling campus of connected buildings that looked like it had been added onto in phases over several decades. Newer glass wings bolted onto older brick ones. I parked in visitor parking, left the windows cracked for Otis, who was now curled up on the passenger seat like he owned it, and walked into the main lobby feeling distinctly unprepared for whatever conversation I was about to attempt. The woman at the front desk was maybe 60, reading glasses pushed up into gray hair, name tag that said Dorothy in block letters. I explained, as calmly as I could manage, that I was trying to reach a former employee, or possibly current employee, named Megan Sinclair, administrative department, and that it was a personal matter, not anything official. Dorothy gave me the look I imagined she gave most people who walked in asking about employees by first name with vague personal reasons. "I can't give out personal information about staff," she said, not unkindly, just firmly, the tone of someone who'd had this exact conversation many times before. "But I can tell you if she works here, and if she does, I can pass along a message with your contact information if she wants to reach out." It wasn't what I wanted, but it was something. "That's fine. Her name's Megan Sinclair." Dorothy typed for a moment, squinted at the screen, typed again. "I'm not showing anyone by that name in our current directory. She might have started in April. Administrative role. More typing." Dorothy shook her head slowly. "I'm sorry. Nothing under that name, current or recent. We do have high turnover in some departments, so it's possible she came and went before I started keeping close track, but nothing's showing up." I stood there in the lobby of a hospital in a town I'd never been to before, holding a printed address that led to the wrong house and a hospital record that apparently didn't contain the woman I was looking for, and felt something between panic and absurdity rising in my chest. "Is there another hospital system in town?" I asked. "Maybe I have the wrong one." Dorothy's expression softened slightly. "There's a smaller clinic network, Bellamy Family Health, over on the east side. Might be worth trying. It's a smaller operation, but they do administrative hiring too." I thanked her, more grateful for the small kindness of specificity than I probably let on, and walked back out to the truck where Otis greeted me like I'd been gone for a year instead of 20 minutes. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, not starting the engine yet, and let myself actually think about what I was doing. I was chasing an address that no longer existed, for a woman who might not even work where I thought she did, in a town I had no other reason to be in, with a dog who very much did not want to leave my truck. And somewhere underneath all of that logistics, I was aware of a strange, quiet fact sitting in my chest like a stone I hadn't noticed picking up. I didn't actually want to find her right away. Not because I didn't care what happened to Megan. I did, genuinely. I wanted her to be doing well, wherever she was. But some small, honest part of me had spent the last hour hoping this search would take a little longer than it needed to. I thought about Claire's kitchen, the pain on her shoulder, the way she'd said, "Is it just a dog handoff?" though like she already suspected the answer before I did. I drove to Bellamy Family Health. It was a smaller building, single story, the kind of clinic that served a town rather than a whole region, with a parking lot half full and a receptionist who looked considerably less busy than Dorothy had. I gave the same explanation, feeling more practiced at it now, less like a confession and more like a script. The receptionist, A younger woman with a name tag that said Priya typed for a moment, and then her face changed into recognition. Megan Sinclair? Yeah, she's actually not in today. It's Saturday, but she does work here. Started back in June, I think. Relief hit me harder than I expected. Do you know if there's any way to reach her? I'm an old friend. I have something of hers I need to return. Priya hesitated, clearly weighing policy against the very human desire to be helpful to someone who looked as tired as I apparently did. I can't give out her personal contact info. I'm sorry, that's a hard rule here. But I could take your number and pass it along on Monday when she's back in. Or, she paused, glancing at her screen. Actually, there's a community fundraiser thing happening tonight, over at the park on Miller Street. A lot of the staff here are going. It's some kind of benefit for the children's wing. She might be there. I really shouldn't be telling you that, but you seem harmless enough. I thanked her more sincerely than the small piece of information probably warranted, and walked back out to the truck with something that felt, for the first time since that porch door opened, like an actual plan. The fundraiser wasn't until 6 that evening, which left me with an entire afternoon in a town I didn't know, with a dog who needed to be walked and fed and generally accounted for, and absolutely no reason to be back at 214 Larkspur Lane except that it was the only place in Bellamy Creek where I currently knew a single living soul. I told myself I was just going back to thank Claire properly, maybe drop off something small as a thank you for the coffee and the kindness. I told myself several other things too, none of which were entirely honest, and I believed almost none of them. When I pulled back up outside the little blue house with white trim, Claire was out front, up on a small stepladder, working on the trim around one of the windows with a paintbrush, a portable speaker playing something low and unfamiliar on the porch railing beside her. She looked over when she heard the truck door, and her expression shifted into something like amused surprise. Well, she said, climbing down from the ladder. That was either very fast or you're back for a reason. I found her, or I found where she works, anyway. She's not in until Monday, but apparently there's some fundraiser tonight she might be at. So you have hours to kill in a town where you know exactly one person, Claire said, wiping a smear of pale blue paint off her wrist with the back of her hand. That's roughly the situation, yeah? She considered me for a second, paintbrush still in hand, and there was something in her expression that I couldn't quite read, some private calculation happening behind her eyes. I could use a second pair of hands on this trim, if you're not doing anything more important than sitting in a parking lot for 6 hours. I'm apparently very available. That's the most honest thing you've said all morning, she said, and tossed me a spare brush. We spent the next several hours painting trim, and it should have felt strange, spending an entire afternoon doing manual labor at the house of a woman I'd met that same morning under the strangest possible circumstances, but it didn't. It felt oddly, unexpectedly easy. Claire had a way of talking that filled silence without demanding anything back. Stories about growing up 2 towns over, about the mural business she'd built slowly over 6 years, about the relationship that had ended the year before that had finally pushed her toward buying this house on her own. I found myself telling her things too, easier things than I'd told her that morning, the kind of small true details you only give people you've decided, somewhere without quite noticing, that you trust. Otis spent the afternoon patrolling the yard like he'd been hired as security, occasionally flopping down in whatever patch of shade offered itself, thoroughly unbothered by the fact that his entire life was currently in a state of complete uncertainty. Around 5, Claire stepped back from the window she'd been working on, examined it with the critical eye of someone who took her work seriously even when the work was just house trim, and nodded once, satisfied. That's good enough for today. You should probably go get cleaned up if you're heading to this fundraiser thing. Probably, I agreed, not moving. She glanced over at me, brush still in hand, something careful in her expression. You don't seem in a hurry. I'm not sure I am, I admitted. Which is strange, considering the entire reason I drove 3 hours today was to find her. Claire wiped her hands on a rag hanging from her back pocket and leaned against the porch railing, studying me with the same directness she'd had since the moment she opened her front door. Can I tell you something that might be out of line? After the day I've had, I don't think anything qualifies as out of line anymore. I think part of you is scared of finding her tonight, Claire said. Not because you still want her back. I don't actually think that's it. I think you're scared that once you do find her and hand over the dog and have whatever conversation you're supposed to have, there won't be a reason left to still be thinking about her. And some part of you has been holding on to that reason without admitting it. I stood there in her half-painted yard, a paintbrush in one hand, and let that land the way it was clearly meant to, straight and honest, and a little too accurate to argue with. That's uncomfortably close to correct, I said. I have a talent for uncomfortable accuracy, Claire said. It's not always a compliment to myself. I looked at her for a long moment, the afternoon light going soft and gold behind her, paint on her hands, hair coming loose from its knot, and something settled in my chest that had been unsettled since March. Not romantic. Not yet. Nothing I was ready to name out loud in a stranger's front yard on the same day I'd met her. Just clarity. The specific, quiet relief of realizing a truth you'd been avoiding for longer than you wanted to admit. I should go get changed, I said, and figure out what I'm actually going to say to her. Claire nodded, stepping back to let me pass toward the truck. For what it's worth, whatever you decide about the dog, I think you already know the answer. You've known it since this morning. I drove to a motel on the edge of town, showered off a day of paint and dog hair and highway dust, and sat on the edge of a stiff motel bed for a long time, just thinking. About Megan, about the 3 years that had led to that Tuesday conversation, about the dog currently occupying half the passenger seat outside, about a stranger's porch and the specific, unexpected kindness of being seen accurately by someone with no obligation to see me at all. The fundraiser was in full swing by the time I got to the park on Miller Street, string lights strung between trees, a small stage with a local band playing something upbeat and forgettable, food trucks lining the gravel path, families and hospital staff mingling in that loose, comfortable way people do at community events where everyone half knows everyone else. I saw Megan before she saw me. She was standing near the edge of the crowd, laughing at something someone had said, wearing a green dress I didn't recognize, hair a little shorter than the last time I'd seen her. She looked good, genuinely good, in the specific way people look when they've settled into a life that fits them, not performing happiness for anyone's benefit, just actually happy. It hit me differently than I expected. Not painfully, just quietly, like watching a chapter close from a comfortable distance instead of standing inside it. She saw me a moment later, and her face went through several emotions in quick succession. Surprise, confusion, something like guilt, and then, underneath all of it, a kind of relief. "Marcus?" she said, walking over. "What are you doing here? How did you even?" "It's a long story," I said. "Involves your old landlord, a very confused muralist, and a hospital receptionist named Dorothy, who takes her job seriously." Megan's eyebrows went up. "You went to the house?" "I drove 3 hours to give you Otis, like we planned, and knocked on a stranger's door instead." Her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God, I meant to text you the new address. Things happened so fast with the move. I broke the lease early because the landlord was being impossible about a leak in the ceiling. And I completely forgot to update you. I'm so sorry, Marcus. You drove all this way for nothing." "Not exactly for nothing," I said, and something in the way I said it made her look at me more carefully. She glanced past me, like she expected to see Otis standing there, and her face fell slightly when she didn't. "Where is he? Is he okay?" "He's fine. He's at my motel, probably destroying a pillow as we speak. I didn't want to bring him into a crowd before we talked." Megan nodded slowly, and there was a beat of silence between us that felt heavier than the noise of the fundraiser around us. "Can we go somewhere quieter?" We walked to a bench at the edge of the park, away from the music and the crowd, string lights glowing faintly overhead. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The specific awkwardness of two people who used to know each other completely, now navigating the strange etiquette of being almost strangers. "I've thought about this conversation a lot," Megan finally said. "What I'd say if I ever saw you again." And now that you're actually here, I don't really know where to start. Start wherever feels honest, I said. She let out a small laugh, more breath than sound. Okay, honest. I think leaving was the right decision. I don't regret it. But I think I handled parts of it badly. I asked you to keep Otis because it was convenient, not because I thought it through. And then I called back in July wanting him back like it was that simple. And I don't think I really considered what that would cost you. Emotionally, I mean. Not just logistically. It's fine, I started, out of habit, and she shook her head. No, let me finish. I've had months to think about this, and I want to actually say it instead of letting it sit unsaid the way we let too many things sit unsaid while we were together. She took a breath. I think I've been building a life up here that I actually love. New job, new town, this whole community that welcomed me faster than I expected. And somewhere in the middle of building that, I decided I wanted Otis back because he felt like the last piece of my old life I was allowed to still want. Not because I thought about whether he'd be better off staying with you. I sat with that for a moment, watching the string lights flicker slightly in the evening breeze. Would he be better off staying with me? Megan looked at me for a long moment, something soft and a little sad in her expression. Honestly, yeah, I work long hours here, longer than I expected. I'm barely home enough to give him what he needs. I think I wanted him back for me, not for him. That's not fair to either of you. I've grown pretty attached to him, I admitted, more than I expected to when this all started. I could tell, Megan said, and there was warmth in it, not accusation. The way you're talking about him right now. You didn't drive 3 hours because you were relieved to be rid of him. No, I agreed. I really didn't. We sat there for a while longer, talking through logistics that turned out to matter far less than either of us had built them up to be in our heads. By the time the conversation wound down, something had shifted, quietly and without drama, the kind of ending that doesn't need a speech or a scene, just an honest conversation on a park bench under string lights. Keep him, Megan said finally. I mean it. He's happier with you. I think he has been since April. I just wasn't ready to admit that to myself. Send me pictures sometimes. That's all I'll ask. I can do that, I said, and meant it. She smiled, real and unguarded. The kind of smile that told me this conversation had given her something too, some closure she'd apparently needed as much as I had. For what it's worth, Marcus, I'm glad you're the one who ended up with him. He deserves someone who actually wants him. We said goodbye without either of us pretending it was harder than it was, which felt like its own kind of gift, the two of us finally being honest with each other one last time. I walked back through the park toward my truck, the noise of the fundraiser fading behind me, and felt lighter than I had in months. I didn't drive straight to the motel. I drove back to Larkspur Lane instead, telling myself it was just to update Claire on how everything had gone, since she'd been the accidental starting point of this entire strange day. She was sitting on her front steps when I pulled up, a glass of wine in one hand, watching the last of the daylight fade behind the trees across the street. She smiled when she saw the truck, standing up as I walked toward her. Well? She asked. Did you find her? I did. It went better than I expected. Actually, it went better than it had any right to. And the dog? Staying with me. Officially this time. Not just temporarily. Claire's smile widened, genuine and a little relieved. I told you that you already knew the answer. You did, I admitted. You were annoyingly right about a lot of things today. I get that a lot too, she said. And there was something easy and warm in the space between us, the specific comfort of two people who'd spent an entire strange, unexpected day slowly becoming something neither of them had planned for that morning. I should probably let you get back to your evening, I said, not moving toward the truck. You've done more than enough for a total stranger today. You weren't really a stranger by lunchtime, Claire said. Strangers don't help you paint trim for 4 hours. That's fair. She looked at me for a long moment, something considering in her expression, the porch light warm behind her. I'm going to say something, and you can tell me if it's too soon or too strange, given the day you've had. Go ahead. I don't really do this, she said. Invite men I met 12 hours ago to stay for dinner. But I have half a lasagna in the fridge that's going to go to waste otherwise. and you look like you could use one more good hour before you drive back to your motel and process everything that happened today." I thought about it for exactly as long as it took to realize I didn't need to think about it at all. "I'd like that." Otis, when I brought him back from the truck, greeted the house like he was returning to somewhere he already belonged, sniffing his way through the front hall and settling immediately onto the same moving blanket by the back door, apparently deciding this was now an acceptable second home. Dinner was easy in a way I hadn't expected anything that day to be easy. We talked less about the morning's chaos and more about ordinary things: her mural work, the wildflower sketch above the stove, my job back home, the strange geometry of how a wrong turn and a broken lease had somehow led to this specific evening. Somewhere between the lasagna and the second glass of wine, I stopped thinking about the day as strange at all and started thinking about it as something closer to a beginning. I stayed later than I meant to. Otis fell asleep on the kitchen floor sometime around 9, and neither of us moved to end the evening, both of us apparently comfortable letting it stretch longer than either of us had planned for. When I finally did leave, walking Otis back out to the truck under a sky gone properly dark, Claire stood on the porch in the same spot where I'd first seen her that morning, arms crossed loosely against the evening chill. "So," she said, "given the way today went, I feel like I should ask, are you planning on driving the 3 hours back home tonight? Or is there a version of this where you stick around Bellamy Creek a little longer?" I looked at her standing there, paint still faintly visible on one wrist even after a full day, porch light catching in her dark hair, and thought about how strange it was that the worst part of my morning had somehow become the best part of my entire year. "I think," I said slowly, "I might need a few more days to properly process everything that happened today. Maybe I should stick around." Claire's smile and the porch light was the last thing I remembered clearly before the rest of that week became a blur of wildflower murals, a dog who'd found his second home before either of us had, and a woman who'd answered a stranger's door that morning with no idea she was about to become the actual reason I stopped counting the drive home in hours. 6 months later, Otis has an entire second bed at Claire's place that he refuses to acknowledge belongs to anyone but him. The wildflower mural above her stove finally got painted, blues and yellows exactly like the sketch, and I know because I helped hold the ladder. I still don't know what would have happened if Megan had texted me that new address like she meant to. Maybe I would have handed off the dog in 15 quiet minutes and driven straight home without ever knocking on the wrong door at all. I think about that sometimes. How an entire different life was sitting 3 hours north of me, waiting behind a door I almost never knocked on, because a landlord sold a house and a woman forgot to send a text. So tell me, would you have knocked on that door if a total stranger answered instead of the person you were looking for? And have you ever had a mistake completely rewrite the direction your life was supposed to go? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.